Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I thank Senator Schumer for his leadership. The fact that we in the Senate were able to come unanimously behind this important resolution, which I will describe in a minute. And I also thank Senator McConnell. And I certainly thank my friend, Senator Blunt, for his leadership. We must pass this legislation honoring the Capitol Police and other heroes who protected the Capitol on January 6th by awarding them this Congressional Gold Medal. Senator Blunt joined me from the beginning in sponsoring the Senate version of this legislation and worked with me on the Rules Committee, and thank you to the presiding officer, Senator Padilla, for his great service on that committee, to continue the work of getting to the bottom of the security planning and response failures that we saw on January 6th. While that work goes on, it is important that we recognize the bravery and patriotism of those who defended our democracy and our lives with Congress's highest honor. The insurrection at the Capitol was more than an assault on democracy. Oh, it was that in a big, big way. But it was also an actual life or death situation for the many brave law enforcement officers who show up here to do their work every day. We will never forget the haunting shrieks of the police officer pinned in between the doors at the hands of rioters pleading for help. We will never forget Officer Harry Dunn, who told his story again last week at the House Select Committee, recounting how he fought against the violent mob for hours. And after it was all over, broke down in tears, telling fellow officers in the rotunda that he'd been called the N-word multiple times that day. And he looked at his friend, his fellow officer, and said, "Is this America?" These medals today, these Congressional Gold Medals that will be displayed for millions to see, one at the Smithsonian, one in this Capitol, one at the Metropolitan Police, one with the Capitol Police, they answer that question. No, Officer Dunn, that was not America. But these medals that recognize your bravery, this is America. Or then our own Officer Eugene Goodman, who after saving Senator Romney from walking directly into the mob of insurrectionists, ran by himself to take on a group of rioters and then diverted that mob away. We've all seen it on the video. We know what he was doing, allowing the rest of us to safely depart. Tragically, the attack on the Capitol also cost the lives of 4 brave officers, including Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who died the day following the attack. And I had the honor to meet his family. 4 other officers died following the events of January 6th. DC Metropolitan Police Officer Jeffrey Smith, his colleagues Gunther Hashida and Kyle DeFreitag, whose passing was reported just yesterday, and of course, Capitol Police Officer Howard Liebingen. We are also so inspired by the work of their loved ones who have come to Capitol Hill to fight for a 9/11-style commission to look at the insurrection and why it happened, to get to the bottom of it, and to advocate for the Capitol Police to support their officers. It has been reported that at least 140 more officers sustained injuries from defending the Capitol. The courage of these officers will be remembered forever. We responded. Senator Blunt and I joined with Senator Portman and Peters on the Homeland Security Committee to interview officials from multiple agencies and review thousands of documents. We convened major public hearings and then interviewed many, many other witnesses. Our resulting bipartisan joint report focused on the security, planning, and response failures related to the violent and unprecedented insurrection at the Capitol, and it includes key findings and recommendations that must be put in place without delay. I am pleased that we have introduced our bipartisan bill, which will make sure that the new police chief will be able to call in help from the National Guard without calling a bunch of other people in the middle of a crisis. We have just passed, on a bipartisan basis, thanks to Senator Leahy and Shelby, major security funding that will help to give the police the resources they need and fund the improvements needed to this Capitol. We also have put in place 2 new sergeants at arms, one in the Senate, one in the House, as well as a new police chief, Chief Major, who I just met with for a lengthy period of time yesterday to go over all of our recommendations. And by the end of the year, I will appear in this chamber with a checklist to make sure that they are either done being implemented or in the process of being implemented to be done soon. Another key priority that we called for in our report was advanced last week when the President signed into law, as I said, all of the funding that we need. And what that includes that I didn't mention, $4.4 million for mental health support for Capitol Police officers and the many officers that are still dealing, as we can see, with trauma to this day. Passing this bill, which of course already passed the House, and yes, I agree with Senator Schumer about how it is impossible to understand why some people voted against it, but it still passed with bipartisan support, is another step forward to honor the heroism and sacrifice of our law enforcement. Those medals, when little kids walk by and see them at the Smithsonian, their parents are going to be able to tell them, this happened. This attack happened. And there were brave police officers and staff and others in this building that stood up that day and protected our democracy. And we will be forever thankful to them. We're hearing a lot about gold medals, and some are won by our own USA team that we're so proud of the last week at the Olympics. Well, this is our Olympics. This is our gold medal, and it goes today to the Capitol Police officers and the Metropolitan Police officers and others that protected us that day. Thanks, Senator Blunt, who's here with us as well.
Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I'm proud to join my friend and my colleague, Senator Klobuchar, as we have introduced and support this amendment. You know, every day when I come to work and at the Capitol, the first person I see is almost always a U.S. Capitol Police officer, and no matter how late I leave at night, the last person I see is almost always a U.S. Capitol Police officer. I was working in this building on 9/11, and one of the last people to leave that morning as the Capitol Police were encouraged us to get out of the building, but the last person I saw as I left the building who was still in the building was a Capitol Police officer. You know, the Capitol Police have a hard job to do. They not only defend us, but they defend democracy in a way that other police officers are not asked to do. And they always do it at the highest level of professionalism and dedication, never more evident than it was on January the 6th. It was a difficult and sad day for Americans, but especially for law enforcement officers who serve and protect the Capitol, and for their families, Mr. President. I've often said that maybe very possibly the hardest job to do in America today is to be the family member of someone who works in law enforcement. Maybe the second hardest job is to be the person working in law enforcement, but those families on that day were watching television, listening to the news, seeing their very worst fears play out for all the world to see on a day that was horrific for them, horrific for the person they love, horrific for those who love this building and what it stands for. And I'm incredibly grateful for the heroic actions we saw that day from the Capitol Police, from the Metropolitan Police, who, along with Chief Conte, who was the acting chief at the time, were here within 10 or 12 minutes of being called and here in force in that period of time. Others came from around the region, and all those law enforcement people that were here to help that day, we are deeply appreciative of. The legislation we have here is really calls on us to recognize the selflessness, the dedication, the willingness to stand in the way of danger as others are able to try to get away from danger. It honors the sacrifices they make and their families make every day. I hope by passing this Congressional Gold Medal bill by unanimous consent, we send a clear message to law enforcement officers that we are united in our appreciation of all they do to keep us safe. I urge my colleagues to join not only in supporting the unanimous passage of this bill, but also to be quick in talking about our deep appreciation for those who serve in such a special way as we try to do our work here every day. And I'd yield back.
Mr. President,
Senator from Minnesota.
thank you to Senator Blunt. I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs be discharged from further consideration and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 3325.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 3325 to award 4 congressional gold medals to the United States Capitol Police and those who protected the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure?
Without objection.
Without objection,
The committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed.
the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleagues, every single one of them, including Senator Blunt and Senator Collins, who is here with us today, for supporting this legislation and honoring the heroism and patriotism of the courageous law enforcement officers who risked and in some cases sacrificed their lives to defend our democracy. I also want to thank Senator Blunt for his work on the Senate version of this legislation, as well as Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell, and I thank Senator Blunt for joining me today. Now that it is headed to the President's desk, no more motions, this is done. I look forward to seeing this bill signed into law. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.